I met Dave Mc Kean in the early summer of 1986. I think it was spring of 1986. And I was 25, Dave was 22.
I was in art school, and Neil was struggling journalist, looking to, I think, do comics and write books and not just be a journalist.
We'd both been approached to work for a new English comics magazine. And the new English comics magazine never happened. But a man called Paul Gravett from Escape magazine had come to see it, and he liked what I was writing, and he liked what Dave was drawing, and he asked if we would work together, which we hadn't at that point, but we liked each other as friends. And so I wrote a story, and I gave it to Dave. And then we went back to Paul Gravett and said, would you mind if instead of doing a 5-page story for Escape magazine, we do an original 48-page graphic novel? And Paul said, okay. That was a book called Violent Cases.
And it went from there, and I thought he was pushy and ambitious, and but clearly was going to go a long way and was going to, already had a really interesting voice and a take on what comics could be. And I felt I also wanted to do comics that were not mainstream superhero children's comics. I wanted to do just grown-up stories.
I've worked with some amazing artists. I've worked with P. Craig Russell. I've worked with Charles Vess. These fabulous artists, and what I get from them is what I expected to get from them. It's fantastic, but it looks like Charles Vess art. It looks like the kind of Charles Vess art that I was hoping for. And it's wonderful. With Dave, I have no idea what I'm going to get. I can give Dave something back, and what I could get back would be paintings or drawings, photographs, or some new thing that there isn't a word for yet. Dave is always going to surprise me.
Why do stars fall down from the sky every time you walk by? Just like me, they long to be close to you.
As far as I could tell, sales were declining, and DC Comics were looking around for anything, for a lifeline. And it was very much, I think, Alan Moore first pushed the door open and suggested a new way of writing, approaching comics.
Looking back on it, I think what we had was a combination of knowledge and longing and frustration. Because in England, we were close enough to France to know that there were bande dessinées. We were close enough to France to be able to go, there is this place where the graphic novels are respectable and respected and sold in real bookshops. There is this place where people like Moebius and Drouillet and these guys are creating amazing art. And we knew that. But it wasn't happening in England. And it wasn't happening in English. And we also had grown up reading and loving American comics, but being profoundly dissatisfied with American comics. Whereas a lot of the Americans who loved American comics just loved American comics. They loved them. They wanted to do that thing. They wanted to make American comics just like that. They liked Stan Lee. They wanted to be Stan Lee, you know.
That's one part of it, but the important part is they sold. they were successful. And so I think DC were happy for the lunatics to take over the asylum, and so long as they continued to find this new audience. So then, yes, Grant came through, Jamie Delano, and Neil and myself, and several artists and other people. And we managed to connect with an audience that was beyond the regular comic book buying audience, because the stories were more literary maybe, and the illustrations appealed to people who were buying a certain kind of music, or seeing a certain kind of film, or buying a certain kind of novel. It appealed to a wider audience.
It always fascinated me that when we got together, when I'd get together with Jamie Delano or Alan Moore or Grant Morrison or any of these guys, we weren't talking comics. We didn't get together and say, you know, whoa, did you see the latest Hulk? Whatever. We'd be getting together saying, hey, there's this really interesting poet you should see. Hey, I saw this really strange movie. Hey, there's a play on that is really moving. Here's this obscure novel from Victorian times that I think you'd enjoy. So that was what art was about. And I think we all wound up taking that love of what we were doing and taking it back with us into comics.
Coraline Jones always dreamed of finding a better world. A world more exciting than this. But never did she imagine that she'd discover it in her own home.
I wrote Coraline for my daughter Holly, and then I stopped writing it for years. And then I looked around and I had another daughter called Maddie. And I thought, you know, she's 4 years old. If I don't finish this book, she will be too old for it. Holly is already too old for it. I must finish it. Which is why the dedication is I started it for Holly and I finished it for Maddie. But that was the biggest thing on becoming a children's book author, is because if you are a writer, it is hard to persuade anybody that you have a real job. You know, you can't persuade bank managers and people that you have a real job. And even your family find it very hard to believe that you have a real job. And your children are the hardest of all. So, you know, my son Mike, back when I was writing Sandman, he loved X-Men. And he would say to me, Dad, you know, why don't you ever write me comics that people want to read? And I said, well, you know, you're 12, wait 3 or 4 years. He said, are you going to write something cool? I said, no, I'll be writing the same shit. But by the time you're 16, people will be around you will want to read it. When I was writing Sandman, I got a letter from a girl saying, I'm turning 18 and I have to pick a religion. And I can't choose between Buddhism and believing in the endless from Sandman. Which should I do? And I told her that Buddhism had a better support network. I love creating myths. I love things that feel mythic. I love creating things that feel real. And that, for me, is just the key to everything. It's like we exist with a mythic underpinning. Everything that we are falls into mythic patterns. And, you know, there are old stories that we wind up recreating or avoiding. And I think that's, you know, there's a line in The Ocean at the End of the Lane where the narrator is talking about reading myths. And he talks about children's stories and he talks about adult stories. And then he says what he liked best were myths because they weren't for children and they weren't for adults. They simply were.
That is why all the boys in town follow you all around, just like me. They long to be close to you.
I don't like the word artist because I don't really know what it means. It's lost its meaning, really. It's like the word genius. What does that mean? So everybody has their own definition of what an artist is. So my definition tends to be qualitative. It's the people that have created the language of art. And there are not many of those. It's the Pablo Picassos and Egon Schieler's and Francis Bacon's and these people. And maybe in comics, maybe Winsor McKay, you know. So there are not many. I'm happy to be called an illustrator or painter, photographer, designer, musician, filmmaker. Those are all descriptive names. They tell you what I'm doing. But artist I don't like. And I'm very suspicious of people that introduce themselves as artists. Hello, I'm an artist. Okay, well, we'll see. We'll see if you're an artist. With comics, I kind of felt there was a lot of virgin territory to explore. It felt like there was a lot of comics had been done, but they were often quite similar. And there was all this other territory to explore, and it seemed wide open. So that's kind of where I went first. But with films, there are so many films and so many extraordinary films from around the world. It was hard to see really where I could go, where you could slot in and try and do something original or try and do something that looked like my work and not somebody else's work. So I held off making films for a long time until I had a clearer idea of what I wanted to do and what my films might look like. I've been to Hollywood and I've had projects at studios in Hollywood, and I've gone and pitched things, and I've done writing workshops there to develop scripts for Hollywood studios, and it's no fun. It's completely out of my control. I do not have the power to make a film happen. The compromises are not compromises I understand. I'm happy working, if people make suggestions about things, as long as they make sense to me, I can work with that. But the stuff that comes out of Hollywood development studios is hard work. It's hard work to really understand. So I'm happy not to be part of that. I'm happy just to try and find opportunities in England to make small films with small budgets that I can write and direct and design and edit and make the music for, and have a much more, use the word artist, an artistic relationship with film. I'm not a hired director. There's plenty of fantastic directors out there who can do those jobs. I just want to make my own projects in my own way.
Close to you.